Unfortunately, Commissioner Achterman had a last-minute appointment that she had to postpone her seminar today. So we have Gail Curtis, who's the OTP Plan Manager. So as we were talking before, probably one of the top 2 Gails in Oregon. So with that, I'll open it up to Gail for her presentation. So.
Okay, very good. The mic was not on, so I'll just go ahead and continue. I need some technical assistance. I was not informed how to advance the slides, so I apologize.
Press the down arrow. Press escape now. On the key. Well, I always use the keyboard to escape. And then I would just use the down arrow.
Okay, very good. Okay, what we want to do today is help you understand what the Oregon Transportation Plan is, tell you a little bit about the process, the elements of the plan, and we're going to focus on the trends and challenges, which will provide a framework for understanding the policy direction. I've passed out both a copy of the PowerPoint as well as the draft policies. And then we'll open it up to questions. So this essentially is the state transportation system plan, similar to in framework to the regional transportation system plans that you're probably familiar with and local transportation system plans. So this is the state, and it is the top policy for transportation planning in the state of Oregon. And it addresses all the major modes, and you can see them listed here: public transportation, highways, bike ped facilities, waterways, airports, railroads, and pipelines. So it's quite comprehensive. We are updating the 1992 plan. We do this exercise about every 10 years. And so in this diagram you can see the relationship between the plans, Oregon Transportation Plan being the top policy document. And as you know from the transportation planning rule, there's a requirement for consistency between the state plan and the regional and local plans. So you see it carried out with the modal plans. We have further articulation of the policies. We have the highway plan, aviation plan, rail plan, so on and so forth. And those plans will be updated as a result of this work. And then it's translated down ultimately through the capital improvement plans, or STIP or MTIP in the case of the metro area. The plan period extends to 2030. We started this work in February of '04, and we have a committee process that has helped develop and draft the draft policies that that you have with you. We will be having the public review of the plan this coming fall, and then go back to the committees, and they will review the comments that the public has made, and then have adoption in the winter of '06. So that gives you an idea of the time frame and where we are. In terms of the structure, the Oregon Transportation Commission, for which Commissioner Achterman is a member, will be the body that adopts the plan. We have a steering committee which is chaired by Commissioner Achterman and represents various stakeholders and leaders of Oregon. We've got an excellent steering committee, a lot of expertise. And then the policy committees you can see laid out here. And they were organized to address, we organized them to address various topics, but certainly there's an interrelationship between the committees: the Safety and Security, Mobility and Economic Vitality Committee, and then a Sustainability and Transportation Committee. In terms of the plan elements, we started out with interviews. We interviewed over 90 people around the state to ask them, what is your view of the transportation issues facing the state? And from that, we developed a Trends and Challenges document, and there's a ton of material on our website, and the website is located in the back of the draft policy document. There are about 15 white papers that we've developed along with staff as well as consultant assistants on a variety of issues, from freight movement to safety, trends in public transportation, so on and so forth. So the plan elements are the trends and challenges, policy, and the policy analysis as well. And then we've inventoried the system to understand what the current condition is and what the needs are out to 2030. And as part of that, we've done a financial analysis where we look at what are the costs to provide that transportation system that has been identified as a need. We use the modal plans as well as the regional transportation plans and local system plans to identify those needs. So we're really drawing on a lot of work that has been done by others and that is in place. Ultimately, we will get to financial investment priorities through this work. We'll have the policy document as well as we will identify where the key investments should be placed throughout the state to keep the transportation system and economy moving. I just want to touch on now the focus of the work to date to sort of give you a roadmap of where this work is going. It may change in the process, but Commissioner Achterman has characterized the work in these 4 ways, that we're looking at one system. We're less interested in what portion is the counties, which portion is the cities, and the states. We want to think of those systems as one. There's an operations focus, and I'll get into this a little bit more. And operations, we're referring to the intelligent transportation solutions. I rather suspect this group has been given presentations on this topic, but I'll go into it in a little more detail. Partnerships to carry this work out, and we're talking about partnerships between all the various transportation service providers as well as private businesses. Also, part of the focus is the notion of sustainability, and when we use this term, we're referring to the 3-legged stool of economic, community, and environmental values being considered in the decision making, and really taking the long-term point of view when thinking about investments. Now I want to just go over some of the fundamental trends in the state. You've got this material in front of you, so I'll elaborate on a little bit. We're looking over the plan period an increase of over 1.19 more people in the state, and of that portion, there'll be about a 13% increase in aging population, or folks over the age of 65. That's essentially a doubling of where we are now. So that's going to create some new demands or needs in the transportation system and thinking how to get people around, as well as perhaps better signage and a number of different things. We know that Oregon has a diverse economy. In fact, it's one of the most diverse economies in the country. High technology is the leading industry in the state, followed by wood products, agriculture and food processing, metals, and transportation equipment. Globalization excuse me, is a trend that is affecting transportation. We're seeing more import transportation activity associated with shipping. More goods are imported, and there is more distribution through trucks. Sustainability issues that we're looking at are fuel supply. The research that we've looked at suggests that oil will peak in as little as 10 to 40 years. Global warming is a significant issue that we are concerned about. Worldwide, transportation contributes to 1/3 of the global warming on a worldwide basis, and on a national basis, it's 1/2 of the greenhouse effect is contributed to transportation. Passenger movement is on the increase, and we know that when alternative transportation is provided, people will use it. There is a trend throughout all the major cities in the United States for an in-migration. People are moving back to the central city areas and using transit as part of that. Safety and security is always core to transportation planning. We have seen a continual drop in fatalities in the state, but there's still there's 512 fatalities in 2003, and we think that's still too many. So as we do this work, we're always concerned about improving safety. In terms of the mode growth forecast out to 2030, you can see this diagram which lists the growth rates for the various modes, and you see that air travel will have the most significant growth, both in passenger as well as freight. Because what we're seeing is the higher valued goods, the high-tech goods, and in some cases perishable agricultural goods being shipped by air freight. So that's a trend that we'll continue to see. And here's a diagram of the public transportation forecast. You can see it's on an upward trend. As I said earlier, there is this trend back to public transportation when it's provided. But all in all, the mode shift you can see from 1990 to 2030, that the highway and truck and personal passenger becomes or remains the major mode of travel. So in 1990, the highway had 98.5% of that mode share, and in 2030 it's projected to drop by essentially 2 percentage points to 96.83. And this chart shows the congestion trends in the Portland area, and they're trending up, as you can see. And this next diagram, the congestion is not only an issue in the Portland area, but congestion and delay hours are growing in Salem and Eugene as well. I want to just focus on congestion for a moment, because as we saw from the mode split, it is the major mode of travel. In thinking about what are the ways in which we can address congestion, here's a laundry list of possibilities. Add new roadway capacity, actively manage travel demand, we're doing that. Improve and increase usage of public transportation and other efficient modes. You'll see that we're doing a little bit of all of these. Accommodate population employment growth in ways that reduce roadway demand. And then gain additional capacity from existing infrastructure through improved operations. It's that last bullet that the steering committee has a great deal of interest in. And we know, like so many things, there's not a single silver bullet. We need to be making progress on all of these aspects of improvements. And we know that we need to add capacity, but it's to address the bottlenecks, and we want to do it in such a way that it's strategic. A little more on operations. Some of the key ways that we can get more capacity and efficiency out of the system that we have are through these techniques. Incident and emergency management is clearly the most effective means for keeping traffic moving. Arterial and freeway management, we're talking about the ramp meters here and other signage techniques to inform drivers of the conditions. Advanced travel information systems, we have the Trip Check program now, and if you haven't used it, please try it out. If you want to know whether you can, the transportation between Pendleton and Ontario, it'll let you know that information. And it's improving all the time. We're getting more and more links, and we're linking it with the with Washington Transportation as well. Public transit management, commercial vehicle operation, crash prevention, and safety management. And then we're seeing a trend towards smarter vehicles where there are in-car information that improves safety. In terms of the draft policy, this is the framework. We have developed language for goals 1 through 5. We're just still in the process of analyzing the financial aspect and have yet to develop goal 6 and goal 7. But let me just speak a little bit about the direction of the policies. Goal 1, mobility and accessibility, includes language that looks at the operations piece of it, as well as providing travel options, making sure that we are well connected to the surrounding states. Land use is addressed here. It still remains a key method in which to maintain an efficient transportation system through the land use and transportation integration. That's really been the hallmark of the last 10 years, and the current Oregon Transportation Plan really focused on land use and transportation integration. That will continue to be an important technique to having an efficient system. The mobility and accessibility goal also looks at co-locating facilities. Intermodal facilities are very important to an efficient system. That's where you have different modes coming together. Goal 2, management of the system, is really the operations and the intelligent transportation system piece of the work. And it is looking at managing the assets that we have in place. The current policy that we're operating under now is preservation of the system, and that still will be important, and this management of the system looks at that. There's also included in Goal 2 is language for pricing. We are looking at pricing as part of our policy analysis work and doing some policy analysis, including using the Oregon model, which I don't know that this group's been given a presentation on it, but it's a model that can look at the influences of transportation, land use, and the economy, jobs essentially, simultaneously. So we're using that tool to look at the effects of pricing. And pricing, as you know, can be a vehicle, no pun intended, can be used as a tool for gaining revenue or for managing the system. And it's really the managing of the system that we have interest in with respect to pricing. Goal 3, economic vitality. There is, this goal speaks to gaining efficiencies in the system through separating rail, having overhead rail passages, interlinking the modes through perhaps a single ticket. You come into Oregon and you want to travel from the airport to the coast using different modes of transportation. The concept of a single ticket is built into this goal, and really trying to develop a more competitive transportation system. And Oregon has such a unique geographic setting given the Columbia Gorge, the Columbia River, which has the 2 rail lines on the north, on the Washington side as well as the Oregon side, Interstate 84 and I-5, that there's an opportunity for businesses in Oregon to take advantage of those transportation resources which translates into an economic advantage for those businesses. Sustainability is addressing the fuel shortage issue or potential issue. We're calling for a contingency plan for fuel. There's language promoting cleaner energy. There's the Green Streets policy that we largely got from the metro area here. And environmental justice and land use, once again, is incorporated into sustainability. The need to focus on centers. Excuse me. And considering the elderly as we design the transportation system. And then finally, the safety and security. The direction of that work, the committee has recommended that a high-level group be formed within the state that can look at improving safety through better communication between hospitals, insurance companies, emergency management, sort of non-traditional lines of communication to improve safety in the state. So once again, the focus of this work to date is the concept of a single seamless system, operations focus where we can get more out of the infrastructure that we have in place and make strategic investments for the expansion of the transportation system, developing better partnerships, and what we mean by that too is removing some of the barriers that are in place now. And then once again, sustainability, where we're concerned about the economic, community, and environmental considerations and values as we make decisions. So with that, I am happy to take questions. Sure, go ahead, please.
Under the sustainability section, it mentions supporting Oregon's adoption of the California tailpipe emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where that stands, or is that suggesting it's done, or you are supporting that it be done?
We are supporting that it be done. This work is it aligns with the State Energy Office is updating their energy plan, and so we're making sure that both plans coincide with one another. Yes?
You mentioned that population is likely to double, but you didn't really mention much about roadway capacity improvements. And I'm just wondering where the vision is for the next generation of interstate highways, and specifically related to pricing. Pricing is a great idea, but why would you limit it only to TDM purposes? I mean, all over the world it's being used, in fact, to build bold new infrastructure projects that growing populations need. So that's just not part of the vision here?
With respect to the highway and the population growth, it's the doubling of the elderly population. So we're expecting about a third more increase in the population. And I think that the work that we'll be doing on pricing will give information that will be valuable in terms of the potential revenue that can be generated. But for our analysis purposes, we are focusing on congestion and managing the system. But clearly there's a lot to learn in terms of pricing. Did you want to say more about yes?
Regarding earlier revisions of the transportation plan, could you speak to some of the strengths and weaknesses of them, say from the plan from '92, and maybe comment on how some of those weaknesses were addressed in this current version?
Okay. The short answer is that we have a more of a multimodal focus today. In '92, that's what the plan tried to do, and if you read through the current policy, you'll see that. But we didn't make as much progress as we need to today. So that's a real shift. But in terms of the strengths of the '92 plan, it was back to that land use and transportation integration. It was in '91 that the transportation planning rule was adopted. So really this work was being developed simultaneously and provided an excellent framework for the rest of the state. Yes?
You mentioned in the pricing area trying to do some kind of a one-ticket situation. How are you working with, I mean, obviously people don't buy their bus tickets or their rail passes from ODOT. How are you working with the various vendors of these to try and set something like that up?
Well, that's more down the road in terms of implementation, and we do intend to develop an implementation document where we outline a work program. So I don't know the answer to that yet as how we will pull that off, but the point is that we need to be working with those other service providers. And it's being done in other countries. And with technology, we have the opportunity to do that. Yes?
You said that one thing you wanted to do was try to improve public transit usage. Were you going to do that mainly through pricing, or how are you going to encourage people to use public transit more?
Well, we have seen a trend where the public transportation is receiving greater funds, and in particular for special need and elderly transportation. So part of the answer is trying to increase the funding so the systems can expand. There is a major issue associated with providing public transportation, and that is the provisions for providing or complying with the American Disabilities Act, the ADA, is with the aging population, the cost to provide that service is going to continue to grow. And one of the solutions is to reduce the amount of general ridership, which isn't a very good solution whatsoever. So one of the objectives is to get those people needing the special needs transportation to use more of the fixed service, so the cost is reduced essentially. And the other piece with the public transportation certainly links back to the land use and having people living close by so that public transportation is convenient. And we're seeing that trend occur. But there's many places in the state of Oregon that have very limited public transportation, and that is an issue.
Based on your transportation system needs that you've identified, could you maybe identify some of those in like specific projects that are aimed to meet those needs that you've identified?
The way in which the transportation needs have been identified are unique to each mode, and in terms of the aviation, for example, a few years ago paving was a major issue. The condition of the runways was a major issue with airports. However, the FAA has changed their regulations where they allow the fuel tax to be used on paving, so that problem has gone away. The plans that we are following are the Port of Portland's expansion plan for PDX. They have an adopted master plan which includes a new terminal and some reconfiguration of access to the airport. It does not include the third runway. However, they anticipate that that is beyond the 2030 time frame that we're working with. And in terms of other needs, as I said, there's clearly a need to address the bottlenecks both in the highway system as well as the freight rail system, which affects the passenger system. And much of that work has been identified as part of the I-5 trade corridor work that you may be familiar with that will be moving forward over time. And let's see, in terms of bike and ped needs, there are tremendous needs on that side because oftentimes it's a retrofitting of street systems that we have in place, providing the ADA ramps, acquiring additional right-of-way. So those have been identified. Let's see what else would be of interest. Marine port needs, we've identified conveyor belts, cranes, rail spurs that are needed. There are the deepening of the Columbia Channel is part of the need that's been identified, as well as some on-site individual dredging activities. The mouth of the Columbia River jetty has also been identified as a key issue associated with marine port. The Corps of Engineers have an ongoing maintenance program where they are repairing the jetties, but there is a threat that the jetties could fail. And in the case of the mouth of the Columbia River, they estimate that the repair would be $50 to $200 million. But part of the issue is the timing of year when they would be able to go out and actually do that repair. I mean, first, the money is an issue where it would come from, because we actually compete with the Mississippi River for funding on a national basis. And then secondly, when would the weather allow them to actually go out and do that repair? So that could have serious consequences for the regional economy. 40% of the world's grain moves through the Columbia River and out the mouth of the river, so it would be significant. Yes?
In terms of, sorry. Where's the button? There we go. There's a special need in the freight community for routes that will accommodate very tall loads. Is there an identification of a high route through Oregon, a network of routes that will take high loads?
I'm not familiar with the freight route designations being coined in terms of high routes, but there are efforts going on throughout the state where the bridges are actually being raised or the pavement is being lowered to accommodate the higher truck heights. But that's an interesting notion, that it would be a high route would be the indicator.
Well, yeah, the route already exists, and so the question is it on planners' radar, or is it just strictly an operations deal? In other words, Highway 30 bypass is the high route, comes over government camp because the bridges on Interstate 84 are too low, for example, and connects to US 30 bypass at Troutdale, and yet I don't really see that on any maps. So I'm just curious as to when the kind of the operations of those loads will get into the planning domain.
It's clearly something that we're aware of, and the freight route designation is currently occurring. That planning activity is going on. But I hadn't thought about it, or I haven't read about it in terms of a high route. But clearly that's understood, because the bridges, as I said, the bridges are being raised and pavements being lowered.
Yeah, they typically think of 17 feet, though, as being a very high clearance, and 17 feet is not enough for a really high load. So I'm curious as to whether there's any plans to clear things out to like 18 or 19 or 20 feet at any point.
I don't know the specifics on it. This is also an issue for the rail tunnels, the tunnels as well. Mm-hmm. So we have identified those. Lots of needs. Yes, Jennifer.
I'm wondering, you've been working with your committees for a year now, and I'm curious what, I know that there's a diverse set of interests on the committees, and I'm curious maybe what some of the challenges have been in terms of reaching some consensus with those divergent opinions. Are there particular issues that have been more difficult, or are there surprises where you have been able to reach consensus where you might not expect to? Or?
Well, the short answer is we haven't come down to the really tough decision-making yet. A lot of what's been going on to date with the steering committee is information. Information on the mode growth, the financial picture, the needs. So it's been a lot of information, and of course, discussion and policy is developing through those discussions, and people are making key comments that become themes or that we hear throughout the process. And in terms of the issues, what's happening really is the steering committee has sat together long enough that there is a good communication between them and a lot of respect for different points of views. And I guess one of the things that's happening is people that came into the committee that, to my perception, had a particular point of view are now starting to speak from other different points of view, in some cases the opposite point of view. And to be more specific about it, the conversation gets characterized in terms of the freight interest and interstate highway interest and then alternative transportation interest. And that's where it can be polarized, but it's a sharp group, and they're really understanding all the different points of view and speaking on behalf of one another. It's quite impressive. Yes, Ken.
ODOT has a statewide NPDES stormwater permit.
Yes.
Are there provisions in the plan, or will there be provisions included in the plan to address compliance issues with the NPDES permit?
Are there compliance issues? The policy does speak to clean water as an objective, and there's the green streets language that you might be interested in looking at under Goal 4. But the NPDES permit per se is not addressed. That is, sustainability issues have come to the forefront with ODOT, and I'd be interested to hear more from your point of view about how the language perhaps should be reflected in here. The assumption is that the agency and the district offices are following the provisions of the NPDES. National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, is that right? And this is a fairly umbrella document, and it seems to me that federal provision is well in place. It's been with us for over a decade, correct?
That's correct. I mean, there are issues here within the city because, we are working with ODOT on specific projects. When resurfacing is being done, there are water quality issues, and there are actually there will be benchmarks and actually specific limits set for some constituents, like some parameters that affect water quality. So it can't be just a general statement. I mean, there will be some specific requirements, at least at some levels, like in Portland, probably Eugene, Salem, and even going into some of the smaller cities.
So what status are the benchmarks currently?
Well, that's, I guess, my question, because in the region here, the city of Portland, along with the Port of Portland and Multnomah County, they hold one permit, the MS4 permit.
Mm-hmm.
But transportation, ODOT, went, separate. It used to be part of the same group, and now it has its own permit, and I was not sure, how, the requirements were being addressed in either planning or implementation.
Well, perhaps we can talk more about that. I know that there is the development of performance measures specific to a lot of the environmental programs being carried out within ODOT. And Commissioner Achterman, as chair of the steering committee, is deeply dedicated to sustainability and concerned about clean water issues, native plant use, and so perhaps there's opportunity to reflect more in the draft language. And I would encourage you all to look at it. We're we really are at a point where it's draft, and we'll be going back after we go through this policy analysis phase. And so I would welcome any of you to comment on this. Chris.
Gail, we've got a question from one of our online viewers. So,
Okay.
Are there any efforts to coordinate the plan with the TPR revisions that are currently underway? And maybe more generally, you could speak to all of the other modal plans, how the OTP fits in with them.
The same staff that's working on the OTP update is working on the transportation planning rule revision. So we're really close to one another, and to date, there hasn't been a need to reflect that work in this, and it may be just a timing issue. If it is appropriate, this would be a good tool to do that if we see some major fundamental shifts. However, it's my understanding at this point that we're looking at more of cleanup, smaller issues associated with the transportation planning rule. It's too early to say. Does that answer the question?
Just maybe you could elaborate how the OTP then fits with all the other modal plans as well.
So the OTP is the umbrella document. It sits on top of the modal plan. So the language that we see here will be reflected in the modal plans and actually refined. So we'll see, as a result of the adoption of this, we'll see that all the modal plans be updated. And then, consistent with the transportation planning rule, the regional and local plans are updated on on their individual cycles. They too will address the policy in this plan. And because we have the transportation planning rule and the statewide land use program, we are really the envy, once again, of so many other states. We researched a number of states and how they do their planning. This is not only a requirement of our state land use program, but of the federal government as well. And they give us guidelines, but really largely leave the way in which the work is carried out up to each of the states. And because we have the land use and transportation integration, we're just so much farther ahead of the other states. Maryland and New Jersey have been some leaders. Florida has been doing some interesting things. But Florida has over 60 MPOs throughout the state, so the coordination that they're able to achieve is it's a lot different than what we're able to do here. Jennifer?
I'm wondering, when I think about a statewide transportation plan, on the one hand, it seems to have a lot of advantages that we should be setting policy at a high level that filters down below. But on the other hand, I could see how things, because of all the diverse interests and geographies, et cetera, that sometimes you end up with maybe somewhat broad findings or objectives and goals. And I'm wondering if there are particular things that you think might come out of this plan that might have a particular impact. Something that's unique, that a statewide plan can really influence a particular area of policy or particular mode or something. Does that make sense?
Yes. A lot of the language is quite broad and tries to address many aspects of the transportation system. But we will get to a fairly clear picture about where the investment priorities should occur. And as I said earlier, the last update that was done, well, in '92, what came out of that was the land use and transportation integration, and that was huge. And then in '98, there was a minor update of this work that coincided with the highway plan. And from that, we got the maintenance and preservation focus that the state's been operating under. If you notice, we haven't invested all that much in highway expansion. There has been some investment in public transportation in the form of the light rail in this metro area, but really we have been focusing on the pavement, and that's what we mean by preservation. We've been repaving a lot of the roads throughout the state as a way to keep the infrastructure from deteriorating. So in terms of this work, as I said, there's a great deal of interest in operations and using technology to better connect the modes and help people understand what their transportation options are, real-time information to make other options more viable. And then, but also strategic improvements associated with the highway side in terms of addressing the bottlenecks, because the truck movement is going to, truck freight movement is going to continue to increase. And so I'd say the focus is going to be on a better integrated system so we get more efficiencies out of what we have now. There's what's being referred to as a paradigm shift in the delivery of public transportation that's occurring across the country. And what's meant by that is taking more of a trip focus, understanding what the user's full trip is, rather than focusing on the operations, which is what we've seen more traditionally. So there's just this shift that's taking place, and TriMet is a leader in this, so we can better provide the service that people need. And this entails more surveying and really paying more attention to the individual needs of the user. So I think that will inch forward in that work. Chris?
One more web question. There's a few on this topic. How can citizens get involved in the OTP plan process?
There is the website that I would encourage people to go to. It is easy to find. If you go to the ODOT main page, on the left it says OR Transportation Plan. That's the link. And we put all the committee meetings on there, and so people are really able to follow this closely. We are having a continuous public input process throughout the way. We've had the draft policy out since last September, and are trying to get comments by mid-March of this month. So people can follow that work. But in terms of having input, they can send it to us most certainly they can send it to us directly, but also an effective way is to work through your local governments. And the ODOT has what's called area commissions on transportation. There's about 13 of them around the state. And in the case of the Portland metro area, it's Metro, our regional government, that serves in that role. So I would say work through your local governments is a very effective way to have participation in this plan update.
Just to round out my previous question about Oregon maybe adopting California tailpipe emission standards, I was more curious where that stands, if anywhere, in the legislature, if that's even been talked about, and if so, how aggressively ODOT might get involved in lobbying for that, or if they just sort of support it or would really sort of go to bat for it.
I don't know where that stands, but I can give you a contact if that's helpful. Justin Kluwer with the Energy Department is the plan manager on the update of their energy plan, and he could tell you more up to date where that stands. And I don't know whether there's been any, I don't know what the status of the legislation is, so I apologize, but he'd be a good resource. I should get in contact with him to see, get the latest from him. Did you have a question?
On policy 1.3, the interurban and urban mobility, it talks about how interstate facilities should primarily serve for intercity movement and plan local streets to serve within cities. How will that be implemented, and especially in the Portland area where that seems to be the biggest problem?
Well, I'd say it's being implemented now, that we do see, that is the way the classification systems are set up, and the street designs are such that they accommodate through movement more than local movement. But clearly a key way of carrying this out, especially in smaller communities around Oregon, is to continue to build the grid street system so people have opportunities to take different travel routes. I think one of the problems with 217 is a lack of a street system through that part of the region. Is that what you're referring to, and how do we address that over time?
Yeah, a lot of the Portland metro area doesn't have requires use of the freeways in order to get from one point to another without making the trip take a whole lot longer.
Well, we're a lot better than many places around the country, but really, back to the local street system and collector and arterial system, which this policy calls for, continuing to provide those in local communities is key to providing an efficient system and letting the interstate system, freeway system, function as it's supposed to. If you look at the forecast for the metro area, you'll see that northeast Portland is the area that's forecasted to have the most efficient, well-moving transportation. And the reason is because of the extensive grid system that occurs in that part of the region. So there are many practices that are currently in place that we need to continue doing. And there are many lessons that the metropolitan regions in Portland, Eugene, Salem, Medford, that smaller communities can borrow from. And this land use integration is a key one, continuing to build the street systems out in a grid fashion, really getting away from the cul-de-sacs that we saw so much of this last decade. Maybe this is the last question. Are we sort of closing in on our time? Okay.
So how I know you haven't talked about too much of the problems with the plan. You know, I guess mentioning the coordination, the communication piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like smaller rural cities, how is the plan going to address working with the smaller cities to ensure that the policies are consistent? Well, you know, because I guess I'm looking at an environmentally responsible system, and how will the plan address that with the rural cities that maybe won't necessarily buy into the fact that they need to do that?
Okay, the rural part of the state is addressed in this plan. It's interesting that people oftentimes will look at the draft policy and they'll say, sounds urban. But we have many representatives on our committees that are from the rural parts of the state and helped draft much of this language. And what we found in the process was that as we looked at the language, it was good for the urban areas, or the problems exist in the urban areas as well as the rural parts of the state, such as, for example, low-income people who need and are dependent on transit. That exists not only in the rural areas but in the urban areas as well. So as we refined this language, we dropped out reference to urban and rural. But in terms of the needs for the rural areas and what this plan will do for it, you know, there'll continue to be an emphasis on efficient freight movement throughout the state, because we know that the goods are coming from throughout the state and need to go to those places. Once again, back to the diverse economy that we have, the wood products, activities, as well as the high tech. We know that we need to be providing efficient transportation throughout the state. So people will continue to, you know, the freeway system that's in place will continue to serve those people. And then a major issue in the rural part of the state is providing the special transportation for the elderly and disabled. And we have seen the legislature has continued to give increases to that fund, and we are hopeful that that will continue. Okay, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to fill in for Commissioner Achterman. There is a lot more work to be done, and I want to suggest that perhaps we could come back and speak to you in terms of the policy analysis work that we are currently doing, where we get the results from the various analytical tools that we're using, including the Oregon model that I mentioned. I think this group would be quite interested in that. Okay, thank you.